Hi, everybody. Welcome to Rosie Speaks. Today, I have Duke Sean on my show, and it is one of those things where I wasn't really sure how to handle it because it's Duke Sean. And it's really funny because before I started recording, I was telling him the story of how I have been at events where Duke Sean has also been at, and I've seen him from like across a field or across a classroom, and I'm just like going in the opposite direction. So I know who he is, but I've never actually met him. So welcome to Internet Meeting on Rosie Speaks. Hi.
Well, thanks for having me.
I am
Delighted to be here.
Me too. I'm very excited. So for one of the big things about my show is I'm trying to sort of intermingle the different groups of friends or the different groups of people that exist across the known world. And specifically trying to mix the titles with those who don't have titles yet. So Duke Sean, what's a brief overview of you in the SEA now? Like where you're at today?
Where I'm at right now. I'm Duke Sean. I'm from Artemisia. I have been in the SCA for over 35 years. I just recently celebrated 33 years as a knight. I've been King of Artemisia 6 times. I was Prince of Artemisia before we became a kingdom. I have several of my former squires who have been knighted. I actually have seven squires who have been knighted, and I have another 6 grand squires who have been members of the chivalry as well. Several of my squires have won crowns and court list. So I've been at this a long time, and recently I'm getting more into developing some of my arts. I've been doing arts and sciences for a long time, really. Some of the stuff I do, I specialize in fitting 14th century kirtle, Gothic fitted dress. One day years ago, my wife decided that she wanted to do the 14th century, and I said I'll get right on that. And so I spent a lot of time, and actually I'm working on a dress for her right now that I just finished. I did a class, did a full series class on that, which is several videos on fitting the dress, doing the patterning the sleeve, layout and cutting. And since I got that cut, now I'm working on that and finishing that up. But I do costuming. I also specialize on the men's side in the Boxton tunic, which is an extant piece that we have from the 14th century. I just did a class yesterday on that as well. So costuming, I do some metal etching, some woodworking, a little bit of everything. So that's kind of one of the ways my life is, or my life in the SEA certainly has evolved. Is, when I first found it, it was all about the fighting, and I really wasn't interested in anything else. But having been squire to a fantastic knight who encouraged me to discover all the aspects of the SCA, it's gradually gotten more and more interesting into especially the costuming stuff. So I've been training SCA combat at a known world level for at least 15 years. And just recently, after the pandemic started up, I'm part of a consortium of sorts called the SCA Coaches Corner. Some of the most brilliant minds in our sport as trainers. Me and Duke Brownless from the mid-realm, Duke Ronvalder, Duke Eliyahu, Viscount Sir Sagan, Viscount Tristan. We're all some of the coaches that we have there, and every Friday night we have a show that we do that covers training methodology and how to make people better at our sport. And that's been really exciting and a lot of fun. We've been getting some good feedback on that. And, it's great to be able to sit in a Zoom room with some of the best trainers of our sport and doing everything we can to make our sport better. So that's a little bit about where I am now.
That's incredible. I've heard about your that specific class with the big. I've been friends with Helga for a while, so I heard about it through her, and it's so interesting to hear the different cultural experiences, especially out here in Kaid. So my partner, Lord Brian, he's a fighter and he's interested in all of the fighty stuff and has attended, I think, a couple of your online Zoom things. And it is so fun for us to learn from different kingdoms because
Right.
when you're out here in Kaid, he's currently not squired. He's been squired before, but it didn't work out super great. And so now he sort of just like floats around and just like learns from a whole bunch of different people. And so it's really fun for him to come like his not his knight is what we call him.
His not night. Yeah.
His not knight lives in
I
San
have some
Diego.
not squires.
Yeah. His not knight is lives in San Diego, and the Calafian groups sort of have their specific. They have a fighting style that's sort of through all of them.
Right.
And now you can see the different delineations of training from the different teachers, but it sort of all came from one source and then expanded from there. And so it's really fun watching the different kingdoms come together like in this pandemic and the different coaches from everywhere sharing their information. I feel like there has never been so much access to so much knowledge as there is now. It's like we're constantly it's like, I don't know, I feel like I hear all of this information at wars on the war field where all of a sudden everybody's tired and taking a break and talking stick this and stick that and about all these different things, and we can't do that right now, but there are still people who are making that happen, and it's really great that I think it's really great that that's out there. That's super cool.
And now it's all online, you know, and the internet is forever and it is ubiquitous. You know, it's up there, it's all online. You know, now, you know, and I've thought for a long time, you know, that I should be doing videos on this, that, or the other. And it was, you know, once we got quarantined that I finally took the time to do my videos on stick mechanics. And which is something I've been planning to do forever, and just never got around to it. And, you know, so now's the time to do it. And I got it up there, and, you know, I can't tell you how many people have given me just tremendous feedback on that and how much it's helped in having access to that. And, you know, we as trainers, you know, one of the things about being a trainer at this level is, you know, basically as fighters, everybody pretty much has the same problems, you know, and so and it's the solutions that are different. And so for me, it's picking the lock for each of the different combinations of fighter where, you know, where they all have the same problems, and it's finding the right words and terminology to get the information across to that person to be able to kind of unlock them, and to let them go. And so as trainers, we tend to say a lot of the same stuff. And you would think that gets boring because, you know, there's nothing you love more than the sound of your own voice, right? You would think it would get boring, and it's in repeating yourself all the time. But, you know, I understand that while I'm saying something for the 1,000th time, the person I'm talking to is hearing it for the very first time. And it is totally foreign to them. And it is, in a lot of cases, it's mind-blowing to them. Some of the concepts that I explain are really just brilliant in their simplicity. And when you break it down and you simplify things, you know, one of the favorite things that I love hearing from people when I talk to them about stuff is, oh, wow, that's a lot easier than what I've been doing. Like, okay, let's do this thing that's less work then.
Yes, that's my favorite. Oh wait, that's so much less movement. Oh,
Yeah,
I get from point A to point B. Wait,
this is
I
a
love
lot
hearing
easier.
those.
Yeah, I love hearing that. And so yeah, it's, even though we're saying the same thing over and over again, we're saying it to a totally different audience. And so, and everybody that I talk to, you know, they're hearing something for the first time. And, you know, you never know what's actually going to stick and what they're going to go home and who's going to go home and work on. I mean, I've run into people that, you know, that had said that I fought them at an event years ago and just, you know, totally changed their world. And, you know, you just have no expectation of that when I work with somebody on the field. I give them the information that is pertinent at the time, and then they go. And years later, you find out that that interaction had this profound impact on them. But, I don't get done fighting somebody at Estrella and go, well, that guy's going to be king in a month. you know that's just not the way it works. And so it's always great to hear, somebody comes back and says, yeah, I went home, did all this stuff, and it worked. So thanks, coach.
That's so. Firstly, I'm really excited to hear that the strategy that you use when you're teaching somebody is like picking a lock. So my Brandon, he was a dancer. He was professionally trained as a dancer before he became a fighter. And you would have thought his footwork he could just like do it because he was really good on his feet, really live, really just like all the stuff. But the way that he was introduced into fighting was he was pretty much told, wipe out all your memory and try again, because
Yeah.
that's not going to work out.
Yeah.
And so he was told that, and he was like, okay, well, I don't know anything about this specific sport. So, I mean, this person's a knight. This must know better than I did. And basically he was like backwards trained in the stuff. I mean, I don't believe that's what the knight was intending to do. I believe the knight
Right.
was just like, well, this is how it worked for me as a football player. And I was a football player, and so this worked, and you should do it because that's how I did it.
Yeah.
And so he had that same or like that thought process in the beginning. And then we met not his night during Kaid's Crown Hogs Day, when we had our double crown weekend.
Right.
And it was hilarious because, hilarious in like the most ironic sense of the word,
Okay.
because
Yes.
it wasn't really funny at all. It was Scala fought Brandon all of one time and was just like, oh, well, this. And Brandon is just like, oh my God, you're saying words? Cool, I know words. And it was so interesting to me because he had been man at arms and squired to this knight for, goodness, it was almost 18 months before before he split the relationship, before he gave the belt back. And it took Scala one fight or one set. And suddenly, like, it was so strange, just the word change. And because it really is that, because his first night, there was no malintent. There was nothing malicious about that. It was just not the way that Brandon hears. And so to hear that that the coaches of the realm say things like, oh, well, you just have to find the right key. It's like picking a lock. You're not the first person who I've heard say that. And so I love that, because it really is. It's really important about the way that you talk to somebody, because like Brandon and his first night, it was football player versus dancer. And while they're still going to the same place, they've got different paths. So that's brilliant, and I love it.
Yeah. I mean, as a trainer, as a coach, I have the information, right? And I have the information, I have the experience, and therefore I feel like I have the responsibility to accommodate the learning style rather than expecting the student to accommodate my teaching style, right? And I definitely have a teaching style, especially for my direct students, my squires. I mean, I'll teach anybody how to fight, but being my squire is kind of a different thing. It's a much more intimate thing, and that comes with greater responsibility and a greater authority, if you will, because if for somebody that has chosen to be my squire, they have given me that authority, and I have that responsibility to, when I see him fucking up, I'm going to tell him, and I'm not going to mince words about it, and I'm not going to coddle them and all this. I'm not going to say, do you mind if I tell you something? It's like, this is the job you asked me to do. So how about you just knock this shit off, and we'll start from scratch. There are other fighters that I've worked with a number of times throughout the world who are not my squires, but I've kind of had that same kind of rapport with, and I know that when I see them at like an Outlands prize tourney and I see them doing something that needs to be fixed, I know that I can go up to them and I can fix that. And I don't have to ask permission to do that. But I don't throw myself at it. I don't just interject into every fight that I see, you know, because I mean, you can't save them all. Um, and the people that I can do that with are people that have proven that if I give them something, I know that they're going to go home and work on it. That doesn't necessarily mean that this is going to be the end all be all solution that they need to fix all their fighting, but I know that they're going to at least go home and work on it, and they're going to try it. And if it doesn't work, they're going to say, "Hey, I did that thing and it didn't work." I'm like, okay, then let's find something that does work for you, or let's find somebody else who has a solution for you. You know, and so yeah, I'm very much, I, you know, kind of not really follow the students so much, but you know, you gotta work with their learning style. Are they a kinetic learner, or are they a book learner, or are they a visual learner? Can they see something and do it, or do they have to, you know, go through drills and you know, or you know, can you just tell them to go to YouTube, or can you tell them to read a book on something, and are they going to pick that up? And so we have to accommodate to that, to really get them the information. And you know, again, with the, you know, when you hear us saying a lot of the same stuff, you know, we mentioned on the Coach's Corner on Friday when we had Duke Allen on. Come on, it's like, yeah, there's a lot of times we repeat ourselves in these shows, right? Because and you know, everywhere I go when I teach class somewhere, I run into, you know, one of the knights or one of the dukes in the area that I'm teaching, and somebody's going to tell me, well, you're not telling them anything that we're not telling them. Like, I know I'm not saying anything different. You know, I'm just saying it in a way, I'm saying it in a different way, because you have to hear the same information from several different sources before your brain can hear it the way you need to hear it. And you know, Bruce Lee says in the Tao of Jeet Kune Do, read in the preface there, one of the things that he always said was, "There's nothing new here. There's nothing that I've created that hasn't existed for hundreds of years, thousands of years. I haven't created anything new. It's just a matter of getting the same universal truths and getting people to understand them differently. And I think we as trainers have the obligation to modify our language, modify our teaching style to accommodate the student, to be able to say, oh, you've done dance. Okay, well, these are the ways your feet can work, and these are the way your feet cannot work. You know, and you've done football. Here's some of the things you can do. You've played tennis, you've played golf, you've played baseball, you've played the piano. There's you know, eventually there's a class that I've been wanting to do for a long time, which is, the title of the class is basically just, you already know how to do this. There are so many other things that we do in sports and in music and in so many other hobbies that are muscle memory oriented hobbies. And it's like, your body, you've already taught your body how to do this. This is how it relates to the sport you've done, or this other activity, or this other hobby that you've done. So there's a lot of that, and being able to drill down into each student and find out, what they already can do,
Yeah.
and build on that, rather than trying to make them into something that they're not.
That is incredible. It's the same premise of teaching like in a classroom setting. So I
Right.
did I taught high school for 2 years. And I wasn't a fully certified teacher, but I was a partially certified paraeducator, and I ran like basically a critical thinking elective.
Yes.
And the critical thinking elective isn't necessary. It's supposed to be like a college prep type thing, but in the district that I worked in, it was more like, let me send my delinquent kids here.
Yeah.
And or it was like only honor students. So I would go back and forth in my different periods from like, the freshmen were all they didn't have an extra period. They didn't pick an elective, so they got tossed into my classes. And then my seniors or my juniors were just like, I need to get a perfect score on my SAT and I want to get into college. And so having to flip flop back and forth in 45 minutes to an hour
Yeah.
between those two styles, it's hard. It's
Yeah.
hard to learn how to teach kids who don't want to learn
Right.
versus teaching students who want to succeed.
Right.
And sometimes it's not that the student doesn't want to learn, it's that the student doesn't know how to learn.
Right.
And our hobby is very unique, to say the least.
Yeah.
And you can't just come in saying, oh well, I knew this martial art or that martial arts or whatever, and just expect to be a master at it.
Exactly.
But you can come in saying, I've done this martial art, or I've done this sport, or this thing, and whatever it is, there's an attribution our to our sport and to our thing, whether it's heavies combat or rapier combat or any of the other combats that there are, because I've started to lose track of the different numbers of them. But it really is, it's dependent on what the student wants to learn or how they learn, I guess.
Yeah, I had one of my squires, Duke Michael O'Brien, who came to our sport with a fully complete kung fu background. I mean, he was a complete martial artist, and he came to me and asked me to teach him SCA combat, and I give him all the credit for this. But he was able to completely empty his cup, and he was able to take everything that he knew about martial arts and completely set it aside. And he allowed me to teach him SCA combat from the ground up. Including the footwork stance that I use is completely counterintuitive for other martial arts, because ours is a martial art where you don't use your feet as an offensive weapon, right? We don't get a kick with our feet, and so I don't use the stance that we have. Just the stance that I use and teach does not accommodate using your feet as a weapon. It accommodates stick mechanics, right? And so I was teaching him footwork that is completely counterintuitive to a martial artist of his caliber. But he completely let me start from the ground up. And I taught him well enough, I think, to be knightly. And then one day he said, well, I've got this thing that I used to do in the martial arts. This little piece right here, I think would fit nicely there. And this piece would fit nicely there. And he starts pulling all these things off the shelf and he starts putting them into the fight. And that's when he became a beast. That's when he became truly one of the most complete SCA fighters I've ever seen. And he would not have been able to do that had he not understood the basics of our sport to begin with. If you're trying to mix your martial arts experience and SCA combat, you have to understand what the two of them are independently before you can understand. This is why I always tell people to fight people from other kingdoms, right? The more you are exposed to the differences, the more you understand the commonalities. And you have to understand the Kung Fu and you have to understand the SCA individually before you can say, these parts are exactly the same.
Yeah.
And it was just remarkable the way he did it. I mean, if I knew then what I know now, if I knew
Oh yeah.
how complete his martial arts background was, I don't know that I could have trained him. I think it just would have scared the shit out of me.
Yeah.
Because I didn't find out until after he was knighted, how really extensive that background was.
Mm-hmm.
And it's mind blowing. And now unfortunately he's had some injuries and he's not able to fight anymore. But just sitting around talking to that guy about stick is just amazing, and being able to talk about him and his understanding of our sport and martial combats in general is just mind blowing. I love it.
So have you met Conrad Breakring?
I've known Conrad for a long time.
That he is who I think of when you start talking about people who have martial arts training outside of the SEA versus inside the SEA. And I mean, I'm sure there are way more people than this, but Conrad and I have had conversations about like how different it is doing his jujitsu or whatever it is that he goes and like does all his.
Yeah, he does Brazilian jiu-jitsu.
There we go. I was right. I love it when I just remember shit. Uh, and how different it is, how he has to like almost completely switch his brain. I haven't talked to him since he moved to Louisiana, But we had one day we were at there's this like Boy Scout camp where we have some events up in Santa Barbara, and we were up there, and it was super windy, and I think that it was we were all chatting, and it was Conrad and me and Viscount Ulf and now Count Oz, and like the whole Star Coffin group. And I have a tendency to just pop up in conversations, because I'm really just not afraid of people. And this was early on in my introduction to Star Coffin, but Ulf and I have known each other for 20 years. So I just like pop in, and I just like interjected into myself into this conversation of knights talking about fighting. And I'm just like, but wait a minute, how can you just turn your brain off from full contact sport to not contact sport? Because Conrad was telling us about how like one time he went like straight from a tournament to an SEA tournament to like a jujitsu class that he was teaching, or to something else that he was doing that was his other martial art. Is there like a brain space to just like turn that off? I don't understand.
It is learned. It is definitely learned. Um, we spend a lot of time in our early years of fighting, trying to understand the thing. But one of the other things one of my other favorite quotes from Bruce Lee is, he says, when I first started kung fu, a kick was more than a kick and a punch was more than a punch, and then or a kick was just a kick and a punch was just a punch, and then as I studied further, a kick became more than a kick and a punch was more than a punch, and then when I finally understood kung fu, a kick was just a kick. And it's something else that Bruce Lee talks about where he says no form from form. And that means you have to understand what the rules are before you can start violating those rules. And so there's a lot of work in the beginning and understanding what the rules are and understanding what, good form is before you can start deviating from that and making your own thing. And making your own fight is part of what makes a knight, because that's ownership, right? Where you've taken the different pieces of it and you say, this is how I apply these pieces, and you end up getting to the same result. And it may be just, the form may be different. And as you get better and you get to that point of no form, it gets a lot easier to transition from teaching to fighting. I mean, I can, in the middle of Crown Tourney, I can, finish up a fight and I can give a newer fighter advice on what they need to be doing. I have the capacity to do that, and then I'll turn around in the next fight and go execute again. And that's definitely learned. That's learned and practiced. And yeah, there's so much work in the beginning stages, though, that, I mean, ultimately our sport at the highest levels of execution, our sport is at least 80% mental, and it's only really 20% physical. But in the beginning, those rules are reversed. It's 80% physical, where you're learning what is a flat snap and where does my shield need to be when I throw a flat snap, and teaching your body how to do all those things. And you don't really have time for the mental side of it, because there's so much of the physical side of it that needs to be taught. So yeah, as you get better, it definitely becomes a lot easier to transition. And I say, when we're just fighting, I just fight. I've been programming my onboard computer for more than 30 years. I've been running these subroutines, and I've been finding out what works, what doesn't work, and I've been trashing old code and just program that onboard computer so that when I get into a tournament, I just execute.
So that actually is going to sort of tie into my next question. Earlier on, in your little summation of where Duke Sean is now, you had mentioned that you'd been a knight for the better part of 3 decades, right? Did
Yes.
I catch that correct?
Yeah, June 6th was 33 years for me.
That's crazy. That's amazing. So you've been a knight for 3 decades. That's a long time. But how long? But you had said that you'd only been in the SEA, playing actively in the SEA for also the better part of 3 decades. So if I did the math correctly, that puts what, 2.5 years between when you became active and becoming a knight?
So I started, the first time I saw SCA fighter practice was the summer of 1982. And I was knighted 5 years later. And in the midst of all that, um, when you're younger, like everything seems like so much longer, right? The you have an advent calendar before Christmas, and the 24 days of advent calendar are just, each day is excruciating, and the only thing you have to look forward to day after day is a piece of chocolate at the end of the day in your advent calendar, right? Because the days are so long because you're waiting for Christmas to arrive, right? And everything takes so much longer when you're younger, right? And and looking at, there were a couple of significant events that happened from the moment I saw SCA fighter practice to when I got knighted. Um, the first one that happened was the first event that I remember being at. I may have gone to something else before that, but it was the spring of 1983 here in Draper, Utah. I watched Christopher of Houghton win Aidenvelt Crown Tourney. And so that was 83. And I only learned recently that he beat my grand knight in the finals of that list, Robert Spencer. So Christopher was kind of my first king, the first king I remember. It was the first event that I remember, like, I was aware of what was going on, and that, because at first I just saw fighters, beating each other with
How old
sticks.
were you, if you don't mind me asking?
I was still 12 when that
Mm-hmm.
happened.
Okay.
So it was right before I turned 13. So when I saw Chris win, it was yeah, spring of 83. And so I watched that happen, and like I said, that was the first event I remember being at, first event where I knew that, like, oh, whoever wins this list is going to be king, right? And that was the first time I'd realized really that there was a king. Because before, I'm like, armor, sticks, people, we get to hit people, right? I didn't know there were kings. We were a principality. We were actually part of the Principality of the Outlands at the time, right? Before the Outlands became a kingdom, before we split off and made our own principality. So we were part of the Outlands. I had no idea, right? So this is the first time that that, like, okay, I understand that there's a king, right? And that it's going to be that guy, right? And so, so there was that. That was 83. Um, Shortly after that, I started training with Duke Brian Tarragon, who at the time was Squire Lord Brian Tarragon. It's before he got knighted. So I was working with him before he got knighted. So in the summer of 84, I got my AOA the same day that Brian was made the premier of the Order of the Hawk's Lure, which is the AOA fighting order for the Kingdom of Aidenvelt, which did not exist before Brian. So he became the premier of that. October that year, Brian got knighted at Crown Tourney. In December, I became his squire. So that was 3 months after. I mean, I've been working with him for a while, and I was like, this is a guy I'm going to be knighted to as soon as he gets knighted. So he gets knighted in October. I became squired in December. I set foot on the fighting field for the first time at Estrella 1985, which was Estrella 1. Right. So I was 14. When I started fighting, you could be 14 at the SCA level. And then after 6 months after I turned 16, it changed to 16. So went to Estrella, 85 for the first time. I hadn't set foot on the fighting field before that. Brian made me a squire before I fought at all. I'd been doing pell work for like a year and a half with him, but had not fought at all. He made me a squire, right? That doesn't happen. That does not happen anymore. So went to Estrella. Brian won crown a month later, right? So there's these significant events in my head about this lengthy history of how long it took for all of these things to happen, right? From when I saw Chris win crown to when Brian won crown was 2 years.
It even
Yeah,
sounds longer than that.
it does. And now 2 years is nothing, I mean, that's an opening shot of a baronial tenure. 2 years is chump change. That's nothing. But at the time, I was like, that thing happened, and I was like, oh, the guy's going to be king, and my knight just won crown. I'm like, yeah, that's it. It was 2 years, and uh, 2 years after that, I was knighted. So between watching Christopher Houghton win crown, this big monumental event that was in my head was the beginning of it all, as far as I was concerned, to when I got knighted was 4 years.
That's incredible. Now, a lot of your story is told. Your story is told in various flavors
Yeah,
across the different universes in the SCA.
that's how my legend grows.
Yeah, it really does. Because
You
I've
let
heard
people take bits and pieces and make it their own, and you just sit back and watch it grow.
I heard that you were knighted at 16. I heard that the reason why we have a 16-year-old limit. Hold on, my dog is interrupting. Hi, is he dying?
No, he just wants to take a nap and their dog's bothering.
Okay. Let's take a nap.
I get that.
You're okay. You're okay. He got to go swimming today for the first time. He was very unsure about it.
I have 3 dogs too, one of which thinks she's a water dog for sure.
Yeah, we're at my brother's house, and he is meeting. He's only 4 months old, so we're doing the socialization things right now. And you're okay, babies. Just lay down. I promise he's not gonna attack your bed, Morrow. It's really interesting to see the different people and how they feel about your story, because a lot of people compare themselves to you as like you are. I have heard people say that Duke Sean is that's what a knight path looks like. That's what it is. It's you start pill work, you start fighting, and then you're knighted within 5 years. And it can be. You're correct. It totally can be. However, you can't compare one knight's path to another knight's path. It's just not something that you can do, because it's all so different, and everybody is so different. There could be injuries. There could be a million things about it. But
yeah, I mean, one of the things that adds to my longevity is the fact that knock on wood, I've never stepped in a gopher hole, blew my knee out, right? I've known plenty of people that have had that kind of injury. We've got a small ranchette here, and a couple of months ago, I was unloading hay out of the trailer, and just bale of hay, 60-pound bale of hay falls out of the trailer and bounced off my knee. And I'm like, okay, this is how it ends. I'm like a 60-pound bale of hay dropping on your knee. Fortunately, it just kind of bounced off. But I mean that could have wrecked my fighting career, right? And you just don't know. I mean, there's so much of it that is just dumb luck. And a lot of my success early on was a product of circumstance in a lot of ways. I've said several times that a lot of my success is also attributed to a certain amount of innocence and ignorance, where as young as I was when I got started on this, I was just excited to hit somebody with a stick. And I never had that thing where I said, well, I don't want to fight that guy because he's going to beat me up. Or when my knight says to go fight somebody, I didn't ask, well, how many times has he been king, and how bad is this going to be, and all that. Brian said go fight this guy, and go fight that guy, and I just did, and I never questioned it. And even when maybe I should have, I just never questioned it. And so Brian won that first crown in spring of '85, and that was the first of 5 crowns in a row, with the required 3-month break in between. But Brian won 5 crowns in a row, and everywhere he goes, get in the car, we're going here, we're going there, we're going there. We go someplace, everybody wants to fight the King of Edenville. Brian gets done fighting the guy and, says, thanks for your time. Would you be kind enough to give some fights to my squire here? So Brian's thrown me at, I was literally raised by the best fighters that this sport has ever seen from pretty much day one. And I've never known anything different, right? I mean, that's the way it is. And because of that, I've constantly, over the last 30 years, I have been surrounded by the best fighters in the world. I seek them out. They seek me out. And, steel sharpens steel. And, there's a book that I refer to a lot that I read recently called Outliers by Malcolm Gladwell, where he talks a little bit about the 10,000 hours that it takes to get good at something. It's something that Duke Uther refers to as fighter math. It's like if that one guy's doing one practice a week and you're doing 3 practices a week, who's going to get better faster, right? If you're doing 100 shots a day on your pel and I'm doing 1,000 shots a day on my pel, who's going to get better, right? And so, but it's called Outliers by Malcolm Gladwell. He talks about the 10,000 hours to get good at something, and how long it takes you to get those 10,000 hours is entirely up to you. But Outliers is like completely explains my success. Like I said, as a product of circumstance. There's a lot of my success that really can be attributed to the fact that I was just in the right place at the right time, like the circumstances surrounding, like being able to travel as much as I did with Brian and to have that leeway that my mom gave me to be able to go. And yeah, it is partially product of circumstance. So I highly recommend reading that book. And if anybody's out there,
I can put Amazon links down here. They'll probably down here when I'm done.
Yeah, it's really good. I definitely recommend it. I mean, because the whole premise of the book is dispelling the mythology that people are successful just because they're smart.
Yes. I also think that because it was a time when it was way smaller. The SEA was way smaller in the 90s and in the 80s as well.
80s. Yeah.
So it's really interesting because you talk about the first time you went on the field to fight was Estrella 1.
Yeah.
I think it's really funny because I have been to I started at Great West 1. I'm older than Great West, but I was at Great West 1, and I just think that it's really funny when second generation people have been around for the same duration of time as wars. So I just had to throw that in there as a fun fact. But you came in at a time where you could have all these people on you and it would still connect. You would still get information. It wasn't quite, and I mean, I'm sure it was, but it wasn't the same amount of overwhelming information that's happening now. I think that a lot of people and a lot of fighters that I have experienced are scared to talk to Duke Sean or scared to talk to Sir Helga or Duke Hansa, or I can just go off the list of people that they're intimidated by, because now we are sitting here on in the the several decades later, and we're just like, oh wait, no, I was just talking to Conrad about this thing the other day and it's totally fine. And I can say that and be okay, but my friend who only knows Conrad as being the king, and when Conrad was king in Caid, Conrad was king. That is he had that whole air about him. And so when people met him, that's who he was. Right. I met him in a completely different capacity. So I come up and I'm tiny, bubbly little me, just interjecting myself to talk to the king. And people are just what are you doing? Are you did you smoke some crack? What the fuck?
Don't you know who I think I am?
And so, but Conrad doesn't feel that way because he knew who I was. And it's really interesting because I just recently reached out to Duke Edric, who I haven't seen in 100 years, who is my first king. So there are hundreds of pictures of when he reigned with Batista in the 90s, of me at his feet, or me holding his hand while he's putting on armor, or I'm holding his stick, or I'm doing this and I'm doing that. So I've always been, yes, this is the king, but I've never been like the king.
Yeah.
So it is very interesting to me to see, for like you're telling me about your knight, how everybody wants to fight the king, and then they're just tossing him over, he's tossing you some of the greatest fighters in the area.
Best fighters in the world. Yeah.
And that's just experience that isn't always, it's not as accessible now. And it's not because people aren't accessible, it's because the lines to fight Duke Sean are 3 days deep. So it's really interesting. It's hard to compare the newer fighters. It's to like fighters who were knighted pre like 2005, because the SEA has exploded since 2005, even since 2000. It's just gotten so much bigger. So it's really interesting because I'll be telling stories about how we would go to wars or events, and my mom would just let me wander around. And I was a tiny child. So like literally my first event, I was 6 weeks old. So my second generation is literally my whole ass life. And so I was fearless to a fault. And I tell stories of like, oh yeah, I would just like walk around and find the thrones at whatever event we were at and sleep on the throne pillows, because I knew that those were our thrones.
Yeah, like I said, it's the innocence and ignorance. Not. I mean, there's a certain part of that is like, nobody told me that I can't.
Yeah, no one told. So also, like, I wasn't raised to be afraid of these people.
Right.
And it's heartbreaking. So the household that I grew up in no longer really camps around, but there's a bunch of like houses that came out of the original group.
Right.
And it is so painful to hear some of the stories that come out of that household, because they're all people my age, in their early 30s, mid to mid 20s. Even I think we have some like we now have babies, and we got everybody in our little group. And it is so painful to hear like, oh well, we hate all knights because of this one thing, or we hate all dukes because of this one thing, or like all this, be afraid of these people because they don't like you.
Right.
And it's so hard to be, I almost feel like dismissed, because I've been doing this for so long that I never had the peer fear. I never had the, oh, I need to be nervous about the way I interact with these people. And I was still raised with those people who were just like, oh, knights are all shitty, or kings are all shitty, or politics are dumb. And then I did it for 3 seconds, and I'm like, y'all are just wrong. And maybe some of you are just assholes also. It goes both ways.
And I mean, I'm definitely aware that it's that one bad apple. I mean, it takes just one bad experience to ruin somebody's SCA. And you never know when you are going to be that bad experience. I mean, I remember years ago where I had, I was at an event, and newer-ish fighter or something, came up and said, so it was like we were all drinking, so it was long after we were fighting, so I didn't have a chance to really work with him at all. But came up to me at a party or whatever, and he's like, so what do you think I need to do to make my fighting better? I'm like, you need to do pelt work. And I was like, and that person like took that as me just being completely dismissive of them. And and I understand that they even if they heard something that I had not intended, and I'd only heard about this, I'd only heard about the aftermath long after, but yeah, you asked me a question, I give you an honest answer, and that ruined, like, I
Sometimes
mean,
honesty is hard to hear, and
yeah,
it is, if we're all human, that's another big part of my show, is trying to remind everybody that we're all human. We all have our social awkwardness. We all have our thing that we're just like completely ignorant of. We all have something. It is just a fact
yeah,
because we're all the same fucking humans.
yeah,
But it is it, it anybody could be a bad experience. I've been a bad experience for people. I know, so I do a lot of volunteer work, and uh, I have not always been super welcoming of help that wasn't exactly what I wanted it to be. So
yeah,
I had to learn that all help is exciting and to be excited for all help. However, I only learned this after I was rude and shitty to somebody for helping in a way that actually made my job harder.
right,
And it was one of the hardest experiences that I had to learn, because of course when you are a bad experience for someone, you don't hear it from them. You hear it
right,
from somebody else.
right.
And uh and at the time
And,
I was
and usually when it's too late.
yeah, and usually when you can't help them anymore.
Right, right,
And so you hear about it, and like in the moment I was irritated because I'm just like, I gave you instructions on how to do this. Why is this having to be so complicated? But then I realized that there was a gap in the communication. While I did communicate what was needing to be done, I didn't communicate myself all the way, and a situation happened where I was rude. And I already have a tendency to have a little bit of a bitchy voice and a bitchy face, and it's just a thing that exists. And I didn't learn how to soften that until I started teaching.
yeah,
And and it is so very interesting as the as a teacher, or as a, I guess, in a weird way, somebody people look up to.
yeah,
Um, it's so strange to sit here and be like, and look back and remember what it was like. Remember what
yeah,
it was like to be in the SEA for 3 years. It's I start talking about it in like, I have two different SEA lives. There was me as a child. So I grew up in the SEA from infancy to now. The biggest break I took besides quarantine was my first year of college. I moved to Arizona um, for a semester and had really bad health, so I didn't play the SEA. And then I came back, and but that's it. In 20 certain amount of years, I haven't really taken a break. So it's like almost mortifying, because I didn't mean to, I did not intend to hurt that person's feelings, but I totally understand how it happened now. And it's the same way across all teaching, is
yeah,
you don't know if it's going to be you. That's
yeah,
why we all have to remember to be fucking nice.
yeah. Well, like I said earlier, it's like, you don't know what impact you're going to have on somebody, and
Yeah.
that's for good or for ill.
Yeah.
I've run into those people that's like, remember this thing you taught me 5 years ago? Well, I finally got it to work, and now I won a crown, blah 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 blah. And it's
Hmm.
like, you changed me for the better, and just as likely you could have that same impact on somebody for the worse. And
Yep.
you know, uh, it's you just never know. You never
You
know how
never know.
somebody's going to take something. And I think to try to, I mean, I try to do more good than harm, and I think I've been pretty successful over nearly 35 years of doing this in the SCA, where I've done more good than harm. And that's certainly not to excuse those times where somebody, where I made a negative impact on
Yeah.
somebody. It happens, and that's unfortunate. And given an opportunity, I make amends where I can.
Yeah.
And that's the difference. you know
Hmm.
are you, because there's a lot of those people. I mean, it's like over the years, I mean, there are a lot of people who have taken something that I meant like well, and they took offense to it in ways that I didn't expect that they would take offense to it. And, and that's unfortunate. And that's partially how they hear things, but that's also very different from that guy that says, oh, well, I'm just telling the truth. I'm just being honest. I'm like, no, you're just an asshole. It's like, I said something that somebody took offense to, in a way that I did not mean that offense. And you going around saying it's like, oh, well, I'm just, I'm just telling the truth. Or I'm just being honest. Or it's like, no, you're just an
A
asshole.
douchebag. Yeah.
Yeah.
Context is
And
everything.
yeah. And at the same time, it's like, yes, I'm not the guy that says I'm just telling the truth, but yeah, there are definitely times when somebody hears something come out of my mouth and they will hear the exact words that I said. I'm like, that's like, okay, that sounds shitty, but that's not what that's not at all what I
Yeah.
meant. That's
Yeah.
not how I wanted you to take it. It's like, I wanted you to take it in a way that was maybe helpful to you, not in a way that you feel like I think you're some hack. So you just never know.
Yeah, communication is everything. But I have a next big question for you. So,
Okay.
So you've been in the SCA for 3 decades, or the better part of 3 decades. You've been a knight for the better part of 3 decades, and you said you've been king 6 times.
Yes.
So I'm gonna break it down into 3 separate moments. So there was your knighting, there was your counthood, and then your first ducal.
Okay.
What was the time frame? What was the time frame between each of those? And did you notice at which milestone did you notice a big difference in the way the populace interacted with you?
Okay, so I was knighted in 1987. And to answer a couple of the questions that often come up on this, it was a month before my 17th birthday. So yes, I was 16 when I got knighted. There is no rule in Kapora that says anything about age requirements for a peerage. So the idea that I am the reason that they changed the rules is just complete bullshit. Again, as my legend grows, people can tell the story however they want, but the rule changes and the only change that happened anywhere near that was when they changed the minimum legal fighting age from 14 to 16. That happened about 6 months after I turned 16, and then I was knighted 5 months later. So and because of that change, because you have to be 16 to legally fight in the SCA now, I am the last of that age. I do know for a fact that there were other people prior to me being knighted who were knighted younger than me. I know of at least 2, including the first knight of the society, David the Herald. But you will never meet somebody knighted younger than me, because nobody else will be knighted younger than me because they changed the age limit, which had nothing to do with me. And everybody else that had been knighted before me, younger than me, is either dead or has disappeared from the society. So you're never going to meet anybody that was knighted younger. So I was knighted in 87. I joined the Navy in 88. I served 6 years in the Navy, did my time, came back home, and I had a lot of self-doubt that I've talked about in other interviews, but there was a lot of coulda, woulda, shoulda. It's like, well, if I hadn't gotten into the Navy, then I could have been king by now, blah, blah, blah. All this, I mean, real, just serious bullshit. And when I finally was able to get over that, I know exactly the day that it happened because it was the day that I won Coronet List. So Artemisia was a principality of Aidenvelt, and I was the second to last Prince of Aidenvelt. Or sorry, second to last Prince of Artemisia while we were principality, part of the Principality of Aidenvelt. I actually signed the petition that went to the board of directors for us to become a kingdom. I have a hard copy of that somewhere here at the house. So yeah, I was the second to last prince. The guy that followed me was the last prince and hosted our first crown tourney, which I was in the finals of our first crown tourney as well. So I won coronet list. I stepped down. I was in the finals of the first crown. So I was prince before I was king. And I guess that's really when it happens. I mean, a royal list of any kind is kind of a big deal in our society, whether it's a principality or it's a coronet, or whether it's crown or coronet. And I don't know when I don't know when I noticed that people started interacting differently with me. I guess you mean like when was I aware that Duke Sean
That
was
you
kind
were
of a
Duke
thing?
Sean.
Yeah. I'd probably have to say, I'd say it probably coincides with how my fighting evolved. So when I went coronet list, that was the first time that I was able to just finally let go of all that baggage, right? And just say, I'm going to do well in this list. I'm going to go deep in this list. I'm going to be a threat. It's possible I could win, but that's not the point, right? I'm going to do well. And that's something that I've been able to carry with me in every list that I've been in since, whether it's Crown or Outlines Prize or the Cancer Tourney or whatever. I'm going to show up that list and I'm going to do well and I'm going to go deep, and people are going to know that I'm there and that I am a fight not to fuck around with. And so that's really where once I was able to let go of that, fighting became a lot easier. Then the first crown I won was October 1998, and that is a crown that I often describe as, and I say this about a lot of people winning their first crown. I ended up winning crown. Like it wasn't something I was going after. I didn't dominate. Right?
I know exactly what that means.
Yeah.
I know exactly what that means.
I ended up winning crown. And yeah, and it was, I didn't dominate. I didn't take crown. Right. And I think a lot of people who win their first crown and even their first coronet, I think it's a fair statement to say of a lot of people, and it's part of the progression. We have these in each of these milestones. When you get knighted, you become a better fighter. That's the question in the kingdom of heaven, right? Does making a man a knight really make him a better fighter? The answer is yes, because you have removed a key critical obstacle from that fighter, and that is self-doubt. You have given that person validation. You have removed from them that mantle of asking, am I good enough? And constantly asking, am I good enough? You say that somebody's a knight, and you're like, I'm good enough. And then boom, your fighting goes off. When I won coronet list, like the fighter practice after I won coronet list, I was still I had a good day. I was executing well. I go to fighter practice a week later and I like reach out, I'm like, bink, and I tap some guy on the arm and he's like, oh my God, that was just a brilliant shot. I'm like, it was just kind of sticking out there, just kind of hit it, and it was like, that was part of that thing. It's like, I became a better fighter after winning coronet list because I believed that it was there. And coronet list, crown tourney, second crown tourney, all of those are moments where that happens, where you get that little boost, if you will. Winning the first crown is always the hardest because of that, because there's always this, am I good enough? Am I good enough to win? Am I good enough to win? And then you do, and you're like, oh yeah, okay, well, I could do another one of these, right? And so there is that little boost. And so first crown was 98. Like I said, I won that one. I ended up winning that one. I was in the finals with a very good friend of mine, Duke Basil de Drac, who was the first native Duke of Artemisia. He was the first person in our kingdom to win both of his crowns strictly in Artemisia. We'd had our first king was a Duke from Aidenvelt before. Our third king had been king in Aidenvelt and then was king in Artemisia. So his two crowns were in both kingdoms. So Basil was the first that we'd had where both of his crowns were from from Artemisia. So I beat him in the finals, and then he won crown after me. So he like followed me. Very dear friend of mine. We've got a lot of shared history in this kingdom. But so the second crown I won, I like I said, being able to let go of everything is like, I'm just going to fight and we'll see how it all works out. Right. The second crown I won, I was in California. I was in the Bay Area for work. And I went to mission practice, which is one of the big practices they had down there in the San Jose area, down South Bay. And Uther was king. And I'd known Uther for a while already. We were crowns together at one of our big events here in Artemisia. So I'd known him for a while. I show up to practice, and this is like 2 weeks before I won my second crown. So I'm a count. I'm an earl, right? Uther, as king, introduces me to a bunch of people, and he's like, "Oh, have you met my good friend here, His Grace, Sean?" Well, I didn't think I needed to explain to everybody that His Majesty was wrong and that I was not a duke. But that was something that happened that just one of the best fighters in the world believes that I'm that good. So I'm that good. And going into that list, I didn't need to win that list because I already knew that I fought like a duke.
Mhm.
And like, I'm going to get my second crown whenever it happens. It could be today, it could be not today.
Yeah.
I'm going to get one. I'm going to get another one. And so, like, just knowing that somebody like that believed in me, it just, even by accident, like, just, they just assumed that I was. And so my second crown was, I executed well, but it wasn't until the third crown I won that I completely dominated that list. I ripped through everybody, and the finals, I just, best 2 out of 3 finals, and I just ripped right through them in 2. Nobody touched me all day. That's kind of when that was kind of the beginning of like all this, if you want to call it that. That's the first time that
I'm gonna
I
cry. That's amazing.
that's the first time I dominated a crown tourney and like took crown tourney.
Yeah.
Took it.
Yeah. No, I've seen the way that you fight. I've seen. I know. But it's very interesting. So you said something that really struck a chord with me, which was it really makes a difference when someone believes in you. Like, it really does. And a lot of, I can only speak for Kaid and for the fighters that I know out here, there's not a lot of like there's a lot of talk about fighting, but there's not a lot of like general boosting of each other, if that makes any sense.
Like there's a lot more competition and a lot less collaboration.
Exactly. There's a lot more like this faction of fighters is this faction of fighters. That faction of fighters is that faction of fighters. And like collaborating is like the. So it's hilarious watching my partner, who is unaffiliated with any household. Like he's affiliated with the households that we are affiliated with, but like there's no big war band that he is like committed
attached to. Yeah.
So he is such an enigma in our kingdom because everybody sort of conglomerates around their groups. So we have like the horsemen, and then there's Blackburn, and then there's Sir Patrick and all of his knights and all of their squires, and then there's like the Myrmidons and the Bitterluck and blah, 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 all the people, our Iron Brigades, all of these things, and they have their fighting groups. Brandon has fought with all of them. But the one person who like sticks out in his history and in de facto our history is Count Oz. Count Oz picked Brandon out at the very first unbelted tournament he ever fought in. And it is so fun to like look at like the first kit you ever put on to go into a tournament. And the kit he was wearing in his very first tournament was my mother's. Because back then he was very skinny and very thin, and we had figured out a way to like jerry-rig this rig to fit him so that he could get onto the field. And he was out in two, but Oz came up to him and spent the next like hour and a half just talking to him about his fighting. And it was the very first time a knight ever spoke to him, ever. And that was 6 years ago. And every single time that Brandon fights in the unbelted, any of the big tournaments, Oz is always there. Always there. And it was very interesting to me. He came up to me one time back when Brandon was squired or man-at-arms or whatever it was, and said to me, this isn't going to work out, but he doesn't know it yet. And you need to, and he told me that months before it fell apart.
Yeah.
And he was just like, this isn't going to work, but I can't go to him and tell him that because he needs to learn how this isn't going to work first.
Yeah.
And Oz has always just sort of been there in the background every time. And he just like always pops up. So he is totally one of those people who is just like, he is what to my Brandon, what Uther was to you, where it was, there is this person who is like, who believes in me more than anybody else. And it inspired him to clean up his kit, to start making his own stuff. Now everything that he wears, he has either made or Acer made, because it's Acer and you can't really make what Acer makes.
That's true. Yep.
And it cleaned him up, and like night and day differences between that first unbelted when he was on in 30-year-old armor made out of like a pickle barrel and some pleather seat cushion covers,
Right.
To wearing a beautiful Acer helm with Duchess Colfina stickers on his cheeks, and and a hand-woven lamellar and all this thing, just because Oz took 30 minutes out of his day to be like, look, yo, I saw you today. And that was the day that I was told something about Unbelted Tournament in Kaid that has always stuck with me. You don't always remember who wins that tournament, but you always remember who rhinoed that tournament. And it's just one of those weird things that like always plays in our head whenever we're going out somewhere. Was it doesn't matter if you win, it matters if you do well. It matters if you do good for you, if you represent yourself well. That's what's important. And go ahead.
One of the things that I told my squires early on was, looking good is everything, and looking good has nothing to do with winning and losing. It's I have won Artemisia's Crown Tourney 6 times.
Mm-hmm.
I have lost the finals of Artemisia's Crown Tourney 7 times.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that losing with grace and dignity 7 times says more about my character than winning 6 times says about my prowess.
So I am not a fighter. I am a marshal, but I am a consort to a fighter. And one of the things that always hurts me as his consort is when he comes off of the field, and it doesn't happen so much anymore, but when we first started to fight in crowns, and he goes, well, I'm out in 2, I didn't mean to like disappoint you or dishonor you or do all of these things. And I'm like, I don't care if you win. I'm not here to get you to win. Yes, we are fighting to serve the crown and the kingdom. We're fighting to do this thing, but if you had fun and if you felt good, it doesn't matter what you did on the field. Be honorable. That's my big thing for him. And after we fought in our second crown, and that was what I said to him was, it doesn't matter if you win or lose. I want you to have fun and be honorable, because it's better to lose a crown and be clean and know that in your heart you did everything that you wanted to do. That's better than, blowing off shots to become king.
Yeah. And,
And
I mean, before I won Cornet List, when I had all the baggage that I was carrying around about the coulda, woulda, shoulda, and, if I hadn't gotten in the Navy, I could have been king and all this stuff. It was a long time before I really, coined the phrase for it. And I know other people have heard it, so it's not like I came up with it myself. But for me, it's victory conditions. And that's one of the things that I teach, is redefining your victory conditions. And that's something I had to learn before I could win Cornet List. I had to let go of that stuff, and I had to say, look, I'm going to go deep. I'm going to do well. I'm going to, and I'm going to look good doing it. And, anymore when I enter a crown, the, the purpose of crown obviously is to establish heirs and to find out who's going to be the next crown. But one of the kind of sub functions that I have, as a Duke, as somebody who's won crown several times, I feel like I have an obligation to when I enter crown, to demonstrate to my kingdom the manner in which I think we should conduct ourselves. And for me, a lot of that means that I am going to destroy everybody that comes across my path. And failing that, I am going to accept my defeat with grace and dignity. And I don't care how good somebody is. I don't care what level of fighter, what rank of fighter they are. When I get beat, I get beat. And it is critically important for me, of all people, for me, to be able to demonstrate. Doesn't matter when you get beat. When you get beat, you get beat. The last crown that crown fight in, I guess, a year ago, I've been fighting with a glaive a lot in our crowns. And because I want to compete, but I didn't really want to do the job just yet. So,
Yeah.
so I wanted to play, and we do a pooled list, so we do a round robin in the pools, and then we do semifinals and quarter semis and finals as best 2 out of 3 single elimination, right? So yeah, I could play in the pools with the glaive, and I could say, oh well, if I would have been fighting for real, I would have got out in the, I would have been in the quarters, right? It's not the same. It's not the same. So when I fought crown last year, we had one of our best unbelted fighters beat me. Beat me at the end of the pools. It was my last fight in the pools. I beat one. I did a double kill and then lost to one of our knights, with a glaive. And that just ran me ragged. And then I fight one of the best unbelted fighters in our kingdom. And, he did what he was supposed to do, and he beat me, right?
Oh, shit.
Of course, I got my revenge because I thought that I was out because I'd lost to those 2 guys. Well, it turns out that Alfred had also lost one more. So we were actually in a tie. So we had to do a tiebreaker fight to see who get out of the pool. And I basically lined him up and pull cued him and one-shotted him. I'm like, so I got my revenge on him. But yeah,
amazing.
He's a great kid, great fighter. And it's like, yeah, you don't have to be a Duke to beat me in crown. I have to demonstrate that. I have to show you that this is how we play the game.
I love that. So we have an unbelted prince right now. Prince Panza is our latest unbelted prince. He has not stepped up yet. But it was very interesting. So Kaid has teeny tiny crowns, like less than 20 people. So
okay.
we have less than 20 people. So the last,
we
crown,
we usually have like 16 to 20.
Okay, so I guess I'm comparing to the West, because that's the West and Atenvelt are the ones that we normally get compared to with their fucking overnight crowns. We have about 20 people enter our list on average.
I thought Kaid was higher than that, but
it used to be.
Yeah.
But not for the last 5 years. The last 5 years, it's been really small. Like 2 crowns ago, there were 12 people in our list. And So this last crown that we held, there were a lot of unbelts who ended up going pretty deep. And now for us, deep is like sixth
Quarter.
round.
Yeah.
So,
Quarterfinals, semifinals.
Yeah, quarter and semis. So in that quarterfinals, we had two unbelts, and it's always really cool to watch the unbelts go super deep in our list, because usually I've heard that rumors are people think that only peers can enter into crown lists, which is not true at all. But a lot of unbelts don't enter because they don't feel like they're worthy or they're good enough. And it's one of those things where it's also in Kaid, you have a lot of people who tell you like, oh, if you're not gonna, there's no point to fight in list if you're not gonna win. Or
if you're not trying to win, right?
If you're not trying to win, or blah 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 blah. And when Brandon and I fought in our first crown, we knew there was absolutely no way he was gonna win, because we fought in 2 gauntlet crowns where they did like the pooling and then the quarter semi whatevers.
That's how we do our crowns.
But we didn't, like, we just did the gauntlet part of it, and that was it.
So right.
Our brains didn't like connect it to, oh, we're fighting in crown, because they just let anybody enter into the gauntlet part.
Right.
So it was, if you have armor and a consort, you can be in the gauntlet.
Yep.
And so we did 2 of those before we submitted our first LOI. And the first time we submitted our LOI, it was for the double crown. And it was, we are not going to win.
You got a twofer.
The double
take 2 shots at
it. It was, but at that point, Kaid was really struggling, and Kaid was having a really hard time. So at that crown, it was everybody who should come out. And after that, it's like, if you meet the requirements, which are be a resident of our kingdom and go to 4 events in a crown to crown period, you should fight in crown.
Yeah.
Because like you said, it's anybody's day. Just because Duke Sean's fighting in crown doesn't mean that you're not going to win it. Because who knows? Maybe Duke Sean's fighting with a glaive or a Madu, which are terrifying. And who knows? There could be gopher holes. Anything is possible. And we, or at least me and my partner, are big proponents of be non-peers and still do the things that peers are doing, because they still want you to do the things with them. It would be boring if knights still only got to fight knights constantly. And especially when you only have like 20 people in your list, it's the same 5 people that you fight every week.
Yeah.
So put in more bodies. I'm about more bodies.
Yeah, that's what I refer to when I talk about entering crown tourney. I refer to as acceptable risk.
Yeah.
Right. You have to weigh your chances of actually winning crown versus your ability to actually do the job. If you're a little cash poor and you don't have a chance in hell of winning, take a shot.
Yeah.
But you start getting into the semifinals as an unbelted fighter, you need to start looking at your bank account.
It's very interesting because we just hit that moment for us. Brandon would fight in crowns and he wouldn't get past second. And then suddenly he was getting to 3rd, and then he was getting to 4th, and then we were getting to 5th. And so now he's been getting to 5th constant, like on a regular basis. And I'm like, okay, well, you've done this for now 2 crowns in a row. We really need to think about it. We really need to do the thing. And it was really interesting because we had to go through and make the calculated choice. Like, originally, we weren't going to fight in September crown, which now we're not going to fight in anyways because there's a pandemic. But originally, it was, okay, cool, you're starting a new job. So we can't fight in this crown because of XYZ thing until your job shit settles. And it's so interesting to find that balance. And it was hard for us to be like, it's a weird give and take, because it's like we have to realize that we're at a point where we could be the next heirs.
You could end up winning crown.
We could end up winning crown. Exactly. And that's like, it was a whole other conversation that you have to have, because yes, entering crown list, you enter a crown list and you say, here, blah, 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 we do the swears. I'm doing the swears because I want to be this thing. But now it's, we're doing this thing and might actually be the heirs.
Yeah. And that's what I mean by acceptable risk.
Yes.
You know, you have to weigh that out, and you have to, you know, and if, you know, and you have to decide only that crown couple.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's up to you and your partner to decide whether or not that risk is acceptable.
Is worth it. Yeah. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with saying we can't do it for this one. There's too much of a risk. It's okay to be
that's
like,
that's why I fight with a glaive.
I'm not going to enter into the list.
Yeah.
But I'm still going to show up and fight those people who are out in 2, who are out in 3, who also aren't fighting in the list, but still want to fight.
Yeah.
So I think that's another thing, is that people need to, it's okay to be like, oh, I've been fighting in list for 6 crowns and then suddenly I'm going to take 2 crowns off. That's okay, because at the end of the day, there's still going to be more crowns, but whatever it is that you're going through that you need to be focusing on is more important at the moment, because you need to be able to be there to be king or queen later. So I'm a big proponent of that.
Yeah, with the first crown that I fought glaive in was immediately after we stepped down from our last reign, and you know, it was at this point where it's like, I knew there was a couple of guys in there that were you know, they were kind of, you know, had better odds than I did, right? But at the same time, I'm like, I'm not just dicking around to keep somebody else from, like, if I win crown with this, I'm going to do the job. You know, and my part of my take on that was, if I win our crown tourney with my 4th best weapon system, then our kingdom has bigger problems than me doing back-to-back crowns. Like, y'all need to step up and figure out how to beat me with this thing.
Exactly.
And they did. you know,
there you go.
So
and
you know,
we all got to find our motivators. But I'm a big proponent right now, because we're in quarantine and because things are so fucking hectic, and all the kingdoms are doing their best, and all the officers and their crowns and the royals are really just trying to make sure everybody is safe. But right now is the best time to be like, to get this information out there, to share with each other, like, no, it's really okay for you to take the crown off because it's too real. It's okay for the crown tournament to be too real. It's okay for any of that
absolutely.
to be too real. And I think a lot of younger people, at least that I'm experiencing, are just like, oh, no, I could never do it. And I'm just like, there's a difference between I can never do it because of work or because of commitment or because of whatever, and I'm afraid to do it because I don't think I'm welcome. So let's welcome all of the people. I'm about it. And then tell them that it's okay to have that balance. It's okay to fight in 6 crowns and not win, not get past second. It's okay to fight in 6 crowns and then suddenly be getting into 5th and just be like, oh shit, wait, I can't actually commit to 9 months of doing it right now, because in Kaid, that's how long it is. In Kaid, you have 3 months of Prince and Princess, and then 6 months of King and Queen. It's a big ass commitment, and it's not cheap. You have to travel. Like, there's a lot. It's a lot of effort. It's a lot of work. But
I know.
A couple times, just once or twice, just maybe a little bit. You only might have some knowledge about.
So I've heard. So you know.
I mean, it's the legend. It has to go.
It's the word on the street.
But it's very much okay to do a thing, and then when it gets to be too close, to pull back. And now I just realized that we've been talking for my proposed 90 minutes, but I have 3 questions that were sent in that I'm going to run through real quick.
All right, let's do that.
First one is, What is ruthless self-assessment, and how do you apply it outside of the SEA? This is from
That's the
Helga.
Helga question. So, ruthless self-assessment is actually a phrase that was coined by one of my former squires, Count Raven. Or that's where I got the term. So the idea of ruthless self-assessment is, it kind of goes along with the idea that it's good enough is not good enough. It's really like, so we learn more from our failures than we learn from our successes, right? That is a biological scientific fact. And it's really easy, especially like in crown tourney, for instance, it's really easy to say, or an unbelted fighter to say, oh, I must be kicking ass because I went 5 rounds in crown tourney. Like, okay, so that means you beat one more person than beat you. Like, you're above 500, but at what point did you start running into the chivalry, right? When did you have those 2 losses, right? Yeah, okay, so you're like, your partner gets 5 rounds. That probably means he's beating the people he should be beating. And likewise, losing to the people he should be losing to, right? So 5 rounds, yeah, it's better than 500. It's not bad, but that's not the semifinals. That's not almost 1 crown, right? Yeah, that's good, but it's being able to, there's a lot of people that say, oh, well, look at me, I'm doing this great thing because I went X number of rounds in the thing. Well, it's not how far you get, it's how you got far. Who did you fight? Did you start your list off fighting? Did you go through 3 dukes before you lost a couple other nights, right? And so that ruthless self-assessment is being able to take a harsh, but, and here's the thing about the ruthless self-assessment, it is ruthless. It's never good enough. It can always be better, but it's not cruel, right? It's not intended to, I'm just going to beat down everything I've done. I'm not going to like hyper focus on the bad stuff that I did. Your fights, your losses are never as bad as they feel, and your wins are never as good as they feel, right? And so being able to take ruthless self-assessment to just look at the thing, and it's okay to say, I'm doing that well, but these are the things that I can fix. One of the questions that I often ask my squires when they go, like if you're in a pooled list, like the Gauntlet or the Crucible or what have you, if you get 10 fights in that pool and you win 6 of those fights, right? I'm going to ask my squires, of the 6 fights that you won, how many of those fights did you win? And how many of those fights did your opponent lose? And it's the whole point of that is, in order for it to be a true success, it needs to be repeatable, right? Did you do something to put them out of position and then execute them? Or did they just walk in with their shield below their chin and you just blast them, right? Did you win that fight, or did your opponent lose that fight? If you go rounds and rounds, you go double kill with somebody a couple of times, and the fight goes on and on and on, and eventually somebody sneaks one in. You didn't win that, right? You didn't take that, right? So that's one of the questions that I'll often ask my squires, and that again is that to kind of point out, it's like, yeah, it's like it's just so easy for us to just say, well, a win is a win. And I'm moving on, and a win is a win. And so, and it's really easy to say, oh, well, what I did worked, so that must be correct. It's like, just because you won doesn't mean you did it right? Right. And the ruthless self-assessment is being able to take a harsher evaluation of that and look at the victories you had, because you can learn from your victories as well. But it takes a critical eye to be able to look at the victories you had and say, what did I get away with? And I'm not saying cheating something, but what did I get away with, right? So that's the basic take on ruthless self-assessment.
That's wonderful. So firstly, as you're talking, I'm just like, I'm hearing the methods that happen or the like stream of consciousness thoughts that happen after I leave a fighter practice with Brandon. He does this thing where he just sort of like out loud processes what happened, and it was, okay, well, he was able to get me at this shot because I dropped here, but I was able to do this because I learned this XYZ thing, versus I got that shot because he dropped his shield, or because he stepped out here and his leg was open, or because of this and because of that. And so I've never heard Brandon say the terms ruthless self-assessment, but I also know that Brandon really works phenomenally with Helga. So I'm sure that just information was just like thrown at each other, and that is where that got picked up from. So that's fucking wonderful.
I mean, and I've worked with Helga quite a bit too.
Yeah.
I mean, first as a student and now as a colleague, right?
Yeah.
And I love working with her as a trainer. And so we
She's a good one.
She is. She's brilliant. She is. She mentioned on Between Two Peers the other day that she finally got admitted to herself that she's actually really good at analyzing fighting. She is one of the best analysts of SCA combat that I've ever seen, honestly. And so yeah, we work a lot on that. We have a lot of the same terminology. And it's one of those things where even if she doesn't say it, like he's being flooded with it, because she's going to ask that question. It's like, how many of those fights did you win, and how many of those fights did your opponent lose?
Yeah, no, it's magical. And sorry, hold on, I'm being delivered things. Thank you.
Nice.
Okay, that's wonderful. So 2 more questions, because I got to get you out of here so you can go to 7. So you had mentioned that you have a ranchette, and I hear rumors that you have alpacas.
I do.
So what's your favorite thing about working on your farm?
Building something, like making something, right?
Like what?
I mean, even just putting up fence, like the idea of like creating something. When we first got into this, we had some friends that have been doing it for a while, and there is some long-term, financial potential. But mostly it's right now it's just selling the yarn. And it's a lot of work. And I knew it was going to be work, but I had no idea how satisfying that work was going to be. And yeah, putting up fence and creating an environment for them. And, I mean, clearly there are two moments in the whole process that are really just the most satisfying. And that is, baby crias, baby alpacas being born. Baby alpacas are super ridiculously cute. So baby alpacas being born and processing fiber, because we have a fiber mill that we use that processes all of our fiber. We just take all the wool off the shearing. We just drop it off, and she makes it into yarn and roving. And having that yarn and having the roving and having product that we can sell, there's just something really satisfying about getting it all, getting it done. Because before that, they do the shearing and it's just raw fiber. And there's some people that do stuff with that, but being able to say, here's this ridiculously supple, luxurious yarn that came off of animals that I've raised. I've cared for and raised these animals, and I can give you this yarn. There's one of the girls up in the West, Brittany, who's bought, thousands of yards of our yarn, and Brittany's the one that makes the null-bind hats with the chains knitted into it, right? So she's the one that makes those, and it's all of our yarn.
That's amazing. I'm pretty sure my one of my little brothers, who is just insane with his weaving, uses some of your wool with his fiber arts. Love it.
Probably. So Will has Sir Liam has made William Olson has made a bunch of belts with ours. Actually, Ross's knitting belt is our yarn.
I love that. Sir Tiberius.
Yep.
It was so cute. Firstly, because when he was knighted, his mom and dad got to be up with the king and queen, and they don't play SEA at all, but it was still fucking precious. Sorry, friendship.
Yeah. So yeah, we got a bunch of there's a bunch of belts that are out there that have been made with our yarn. And that's amazing too. I mean, Helga's belt was made with our yarn. Will wove that, did a brocade, all the yarn, including he wove it. Him and Roxanne had dyed the yarn for that. So yeah, there's a lot of it out there, and being able to, it's like, hey, there's this thing coming up, and I'm like, let me just give you the yarn so you can make a belt for the thing. That's really nice. And so yeah, but it's the idea of making something like it's way more satisfying than my job with the government.
I believe it.
Because it feels like I'm creating something, it's like I'm making something.
Yeah. Okay. So last question, and I saved the most serious one for last. Are you ready?
All right.
This is from Sarah and Gabe.
Okay.
They ask you, if you could have a 1 foot tall rhinoceros or a 30-pound silverback gorilla, what would you have and why?
1 pound rhinoceros or a 30-pound silverback gorilla.
A 1 foot tall rhinoceros. So a rhinoceros that was this height.
Or a 30-pound
silverback gorilla.
I'd probably have to go with the silverback gorilla. I think it'd be a little bit more relatable. Even though gorillas are super smart. They can learn sign language. And especially, the silverback. I mean, that's an animal with a lot of experience, and if they could talk, that, they could impart a great deal of wisdom. So I think I would go with the 30-pound.
Yeah, that's what they said. A 1 foot tall rhinoceros or a 30-pound gorilla. So basically the size of a 2-year-old.
Yeah, well, if I had one of those. So yeah, 30-pound silverback gorilla would be super adorable too.
I can just picture you like at any of the wars, just like carrying him around.
I'd be totally cuddled up with the 30-pound silverback.
Oh my goodness. Sean, this is wonderful. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, Rosie. I really appreciate it. I could talk to you for hours and hours on end.
Oh my gosh, me too. I didn't even get through all my questions, but you got stuff to do and we had lots to talk about. I guess we'll just have to have you come back on. Maybe we'll bring Sarah on and record with her next time.
There you go. I'd be happy to.
I love her. She's my favorite. All right. Well, bye, everybody. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Rosie.